So, when you look at a map of the world today, what do you see? Is it like a big pie being sliced up, or is it more like one power is still trying to own the whole bakery? That right there is the central question behind America's grand strategy, and that's what we're going to dig into today. So there's this really popular idea out there, right? That the world is kind of getting carved up into these three neat little spheres of influence. You've got one for the US, one for China, and one for Russia. It's a very clean, very simple way to look at things. But here's the thing. The evidence, what's actually happening on the ground, well, that tells a very different story. All right, so let's dive into this theory first. The basic premise is that we're all heading towards some kind of new, more stable, more predictable world order. Yeah, it's often called the condominium theory. And you can totally see the appeal, can't you? I mean, it offers this really tidy vision for what feels like a super chaotic world. The idea is that the big powers have sort of tacitly agreed to stop messing around in each other's backyards, all to keep things from blowing up into a huge conflict. So, at its core, the theory is pretty simple. The US gets the Western Hemisphere, China gets Asia, and Russia gets its traditional stomping grounds in its European hinterland. You can almost think of it like a Yalta 2.0. Everybody just stays in their own lane, and that's how we avoid a big global pileup. And the promise here, the big sell, is stability. The idea is, if you just draw clear lines on the map, you can, in theory, stop all these messy, unpredictable rivalries that could, lead to a major war. It looks great on paper, but does it actually match what's happening in the real world? And this is exactly where the whole theory just starts to fall apart. Because when you actually look at what the US has been doing lately, its actions are telling a completely different story. Washington isn't settling for its one slice of the pie. No, it's playing for something way, way bigger, total global primacy. This quote from our source material really gets to the heart of the matter. This whole idea of a peaceful, divided world, it just doesn't square with what America is actually doing. The US isn't acting like some regional power that's happy with its little corner of the globe. Nope, it's still acting like it's the only global power. Okay, so let's look at the actual evidence. We're going to dive into a few key regions and see exactly how US policy is actively blowing up this whole theory of a neatly divided world. All right, first up, the Middle East. Now, if there was any place on Earth where you'd expect the US to maybe take a step back and say, all right, you guys handle your own neighborhood, this would probably be it, right? But that is not what's happening, not even close. Just take a look at these numbers. In late 2024, pretty quietly, the US boosted its troop presence in the wider Middle East from about 34,000 all the way up to 50,000. Now, let me ask you, is that the move of a country that's just happy with its own hemisphere? I don't think so. And then you've got this number, $3.8 billion. That's how much military aid the US gives to Israel every single year. Look, this isn't just a line item in a budget, it's a massive strategic commitment. And it's one that just doesn't work with the idea of sharing the Middle East with other big powers. And this commitment, it's totally structural. American primacy is what guarantees Israel's military edge. It's what stops Russia and China from just arming Israel's rivals to the teeth, and it provides that crucial diplomatic cover at places like the UN. That's not something you can do if you're just one of three equal partners on the world stage. It absolutely locks the US into a dominant global role. And it's not just about these direct commitments either. The US is playing chess, actively shaping alliances on the ground. It's propping up a coalition of Sunni states to box in Iran. But there's another goal here, one that's just as important: building a firewall to keep Russian and Chinese influence from spreading through the region. Okay, let's pivot now to Eurasia. We're talking about what Russia and China basically consider their own backyards. And in this arena, the US isn't just playing defense. Oh no, it is going on offense. This right here lays out the strategy perfectly. So, get this. Russia was all set to control this super important transport corridor in the Caucasus. Then, out of nowhere, the US swoops in, brokers its own deal, and ends up leasing and managing the route itself. And just like that, Washington boots Moscow out and becomes the new power broker, right in Russia's traditional sphere of influence. A classic power move. But the US strategy goes even deeper than that. Washington is also actively encouraging something called a Turkic belt, basically an alliance of Turkic-speaking nations that stretches all the way from Turkey to Central Asia. Now, on the surface, this looks like it's all about culture and trade, but underneath, it is a brilliant geopolitical play. And this table really breaks down just how clever this strategy is. Because with this one alliance, the US puts pressure on both Russia and China at the exact same time. For Russia, it helps create new trade routes like the Middle Corridor that completely sidestep Russian territory. And for China, well, it's a direct competitor to their massive Belt and Road Initiative. And it creates this cultural block that, let's just say, makes Beijing pretty nervous. It's like a strategic two-for-one deal. So, we've looked at the evidence. It's pretty clear the world isn't being neatly partitioned. So what's really going on? What's the alternative model? Well, the reality is something way more complex and a whole lot more competitive. Okay, so if there's one big takeaway here, it's this. We have to completely throw out that simple idea of the world map being carved up like a game of Risk. You know, these clean, static borders between big empires. That's just not the world we live in anymore. Not at all. Instead, a much, much better way to think about it is like a Venn diagram. We're living in a world of these overlapping arcs of influence, where American, Russian, and Chinese interests are constantly bumping into each other, intersecting and clashing. It's not neat, it's not tidy, it's fluid, it's messy, and it is always, always in motion. And that leaves us with one final big thought. If we stop looking at the world as this stable, color-coded map and start seeing it as a fluid diagram of constant competition, well, that means we have to change where we're looking. The old borders don't matter nearly as much as the places where these spheres of influence overlap and intersect. So the real question for the future isn't who owns this piece of the map. No. The real question is, where will the next contest for influence catch fire?